'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
Bienvenidas al podcast Dos Bold Latinas. Aquí están sus hosts, Jatna Abreu
y Josibel Madera Vialets, dos latinas feministas born in Santo Domingo y in New York.
Passionate about Latina empowerment, Spanglish,
learning, growth, and so much more.
Hola, mujeres. Today we have a special guest, Alejandra Hernandez, who has joined us to discuss overcoming imposter syndrome to succeed as leaders. Alejandra Hernandez is a first-generation Latina on a mission to empower Latina professionals to build confidence, overcome imposter syndrome, and thrive in leadership roles. She pivoted into career coaching in 2019, and since then has helped women increase their salary by 35%, break into their first director level roles, quit toxic jobs, advocate for themselves, and feel confident as leaders at work. Her vision is for a world where women are heard, empowered, uplifted, and safe to contribute their magic to the world. She graduated from the University of Maryland with a bachelor's in sociology and lives in Miami with her fiance and dog. So welcome to our podcast, Alejandra. We're hoping to learn a lot today from you.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here, and I'm really excited to jump into this conversation about imposter syndrome.
Of course. And so before we started recording with you, we were just sharing that Rosie and I had already talked about this topic in a previous episode, where her and I personally share our experiences and stories and basically how we ourselves overcome imposter syndrome every time it shows up. But today we have you kind of like as an expert in what you normally focus on in working with Latina professionals to ensure that they too can actually overcome imposter syndrome. And you actually have some tips and some things that you're going to share with us. So we're super excited to kind of ask you some questions about that and for you to share with us how to get there, how to overcome imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. Yes. I think this is going to be great.
So let's just jump right in. Cuéntanos a little bit about you, Alejandra. So where were you born? Like I read a little bit about your biography, but like we want to know more as to how your culture, your background, your family, and basically why did you end up, getting into coaching women in leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was born and raised in Maryland. So I'm from right outside of the DC area and went to college out there. I worked in the city for a little bit, in Washington, DC for a little bit before moving down to Miami. And I've been in Miami for a little over 6 years. I feel like I'm at the 6.5-year mark now. And it's wild to think that much time has passed by. My parents immigrated from Colombia. And so I grew up in a very Colombian household and had such a great time being able to be raised in that kind of culture. My mom used to send me to Colombia every couple of years. And so I was very fortunate enough to have the time to go back to the country. And I mean, this is a whole separate topic, but I think it definitely helped me as I grew up to really appreciate the privilege it is to be an American and what it is to understand that I was really able to have so much because of my mom immigrating to this country. And that was very humbling. And I think I learned that as I went to Colombia growing up. And so very fortunate to be able to have that opportunity. And in terms of how I got to coaching, I mean, it's really such a wild journey, but I graduated college, first generation to graduate college. And it was very hard for me in the workplace to navigate it. I just didn't understand so many different things about office politics, negotiating salary, like what jobs are better than others in terms of how much money you can make, career trajectory. Like there was so much that I didn't understand. And I spent 7 years really cycling through what I call the cycle of shitty jobs, where I would go to one job and then I'd be like, this is it. And then I'd be there for like an hour. And then I'd be like, no, or an hour, I'm saying a year. And then I would be like, no, an hour would be very concerning. Or then I would go to another job and then I'd be excited about that job. And I cycled through this until finally one day I was like, look, the common denominator is me. And it was really an epiphany where I had to go within and be like, what's going on? Who is Alejandra? What does she love? What does she want to do? What impact does she want to have? And it was the first time, this was, I think it was like 27 when this happened. And I started this really journey of like, what is it that I desire? And I wound up at a company, not actually wanting to go into career coaching, but I wound up at a company who had just opened up a career coaching department. And they were looking for some help in that department. And because I was there, I was open to helping. And that's how I literally stumbled into career coaching. It was not my plan. I did not go for it, but I was there to support. And when I encountered career coaching, I was like, oh, like it all clicked. I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And that's where my career coaching career started. It started within a company. I was fortunate enough to be able to learn the ropes under someone else and then go off on my own because I knew who I wanted to serve. I knew that I wanted to serve women of color. I knew that I felt very passionate about serving first gen Latinas. Like that's always been something that I felt very close to. And when you work in a company, you don't have autonomy over who you work with. It's like whoever comes in for clients. And yo no quería eso. I wanted to do something else. And so I decided to go off on my own and start my own coaching practice. And that's what I've been doing for 2 years now.
That's awesome, Alejandra. And welcome. I didn't formally welcome you during the intro. And I am like odd and just thinking, I hope that's me one day. Because I will be completely honest, I've been in corporate for 6 years now. And I still say, no me encuentro. Yo digo, si a mí me preguntan like, oh, where do I want to be in 5 years from now? I can't tell you. I just kind of been going with the flow. And then I do, like John and I do work at the same corporation. And it's like, I went in straight into sales. We have multiple departments. And I said, oh, I want to switch and learn more. But then in the whole switching, I kind of ended up still in sales, just different position. And I still struggle with the whole imposter syndrome on that side. And then also before starting corporate, I would work with my parents, and informally I would have to have like leadership roles. It wasn't, formally, but como la hija, I kind of had to oversee things. And I always struggled with, I said, well, I just lack confidence. But the more and more I heard of imposter syndrome, I said, wait a minute, I think it's more of imposter syndrome than confidence, because many of the things I know I could do them, but I just, depending on the personality of the person, like if there's someone that's like stronger A in me, like, or, we go into all these different personality traits of Enneagram, all of that. I am like a peacemaker, number 8. So it's like all of just putting that out there to say of how do we, for example, when we are confused between confidence, imposter syndrome, all these things that go through our head, how would you say that we can unpack and reflect like what causes imposter syndrome at the end of the day?
Yeah. So this is so good. And I think this is a really great reflection on how imposter syndrome can come up in many different scenarios. And what I usually will say is that I don't speak about imposter syndrome in this way of like, we're going to crush it and you're going to overcome it once and for all. Because truth be told, I don't actually believe that. In my own experience and what I've seen in some other people is we tend to experience this fear when we are expanding outside of our current comfort zone, whatever that is. when we are expanding outside of that, we tend to start to feel these fears of like, oh, this is uncomfortable. This is new. This is different. We don't know. It's the uncertainty. And so I think it's something that can come up at each level in which you are growing. And so that's the first thing, and being able to recognize that. So a lot of the tools that I'm going to share today and a lot of the insights that I'm going to provide today are going to be tools for you to have for today, for next year, for 10 years from now, as you continue to grow. And then in terms of the things that causes, I like to break them down into two different buckets. And I think it's so important to recognize that there are these two aspects, and it's not just one and it's just not the other. And that is the internal environment and the external environment. And so when we take the internal and the external, what I mean by internal are these things like your thoughts, your beliefs, your confidence, like how much you believe you are capable of doing something, regardless of what personality you encounter, regardless of who's in the room, regardless of whatever it may be. Confidence that coming from within. Those are things that are internal. Your thoughts, your beliefs, who you decide to select as your friends also are things that are within your control. Now, the external environment are very real things that we experience not only as women, but as women of color, Latinas, Black women, different people will experience based on how they show up in the world. It's external systemic problems that we see. So these are things like the pay gap. These are things like, labeling and stereotyping certain groups of people. These are things like people's bias. These are very real systemic issues. So we talk about the isms like racism and sexism and disability, like discriminating against people based on their disability status, many different things that systemically impact us. And I like to bring that up because it's so important that we see that imposter syndrome has both of these components. And so a lot of what I do is supporting my clients in being able to address the internal environment, not ignoring that there's an external environment, but being aware about it. And so one example to really drive this home is I was just having a client call where I had someone who was asking me about imposter syndrome and was thinking that they had imposter syndrome. But really, once we got to talking, it was like, it sounds like you have a very toxic boss. It sounds like you have someone who is saying comments that trigger something in you to doubt what you're experiencing. And while we can absolutely work on your mindset and absolutely work on how you can receive that information, it's very important to know that the things they're saying are inappropriate. How they're treating you is disrespectful, and really being able to notice those things. So that's what I mean by internal and external. And then I asked her, I was like, so do you doubt to believe that you're capable? And she's like, no, I know that I'm capable, but it's like, they'll say this and then they'll say that, and they'll make comments. And then she starts to get upset about like, they don't think I belong here. That's actually a sense of belonging. That's not imposter syndrome. So I think really being able to discern between those things and realize, where are the things where like no one's told me I'm not capable, but I just have this voice in my head that's the internal that's telling me I'm not capable, and working on those things. And I like to bring that up so that people can see it can show up in different places. It doesn't mean you have to be like a CEO. It doesn't mean you have to be in any kind of thing. It can show up if you get selected for an award. It can show up if you are the person who is the unofficial leader in a small business, like you were saying, Rosibel. It can show up in many different ways, but being able to see the internal and the external, these causes can really come from what we believe about ourselves, what we think, our mindset. And a lot of that is like societal, our upbringing. And then we also have external environments, things that are systemic, comments that people make. I've had clients tell me, like, people ask them, like, are you like, I just don't know if you really speak English good enough, when they speak English fine. But it's comments like that that create some fear in a lot of the clients that I work in, and then starts to create doubt. And noticing those two things, I think, are the most important aspect to start with.
Wow, that's a lot. Alejandra, a lot of good information, because for me personally, as I was sharing earlier, and I do have a question about this later for you, that happens to me a lot where I'm in rooms where, there's other people and I may be the only, right? The only one, the only Latina woman, right? Like the only, person of color. So when I'm in those situations, like I tend to, and there's questions that are, I don't know, people ask questions or like there's things that I'm like, I want to contribute to within the meeting or the room. Like sometimes like I doubt myself because I then think about like, okay, how are they going to perceive me? Like, do I even know what I'm saying? Like, is it appropriate? Like, do they, all the biases that they may have, right? Like about me or like just where I come from. So all of that comes into, like into play and into my head, those intrusive thoughts, right? Per se that you said. So it's hard for me to then like be myself or just like contribute because then I feel like I can't do it, right? For all those pieces that you mentioned.
Yeah. And one of the things about that, I've had this conversation a lot, is when there's so much struggle about what am I going to say? How do I say it? Are they going to understand it? Do I know what I'm talking about? Maybe I should say something. Maybe I shouldn't. As you're doing all of that, even as you as the listener, you can listen to how energy draining that is. You're thinking so much about what to say, how to say it, to sometimes not even say anything. And then as you spend so much of your energy doing that, well, guess what? That's less time of your energy being creative, being strategic, being able to solve problems. And this is how we begin to widen a gap of Latinas in leadership, which is ultimately what I feel like just is my passion, is just like driving this, because there are so few Latinas in leadership. It is growing, but there are so few. And a part of it is all of these things that come up at like the manager level that can be very triggering for Latinas. And there's such a clear line of distinction between the amount of Latinas in managers, which are still very few, and then to director level. Like once you go from that to the director, like it's a very clear line of how many people made it to that next level. And a lot of it really has to do with so many different aspects around speaking up, confidence, imposter syndrome, and the amount of energy you use being afraid about how to say something and what's it going to look like. That takes away from performance in other areas that are key in being able to break into higher level roles.
And I think it's interesting how that happens to us. I mean, I want to say like women overall, but I think a lot more for Latinas too, right? Because then we have like all these other things that are happening aside from being a woman. So when you look at a job and you're like, okay, I'm going to go most of the time, what we do is that we look at the requirements, right? And we're like, nope, as soon as we find one requirement that we're like, yeah, I don't
literally one,
right? Like I can't apply because I don't meet that requirement, right? That one thing that you could potentially like, it doesn't really matter, right? So versus men, right? Where they're looking at something and they might not even meet all the requirements, but they're like, you know what? I'll just go for that. So, it's crazy how that happens, right? Where we're like questioning whether or not like we're able to do certain things, but then men are just like, nope, I'm going to get this done.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.
For everything you've talked about. So when you talk about like how to unpack it, so how internal versus external. So now we know that because you are a professional and you actually do this, right, for a living, we know that you have certain tips, right, that you can provide to all of us to overcome imposter syndrome. And so we know that it's really good and it's quite a lot. So we want to hear from you as to like, what can we do when we feel that way? And like you said, like now, next week, a year from now, that we can always go back to that and think about those tips or even like walk through them and just be prepared to get ourselves out of the, right? Like out of that situation or out of the mentality of like, nope, like I can do this, instead of like feeling like an imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. So I have a 3-step framework that I talk about whenever I go through overcoming imposter syndrome. And they're very simple. So you can even write down each of the steps, and then I'll actually unpack what each step means and what that can look like. Very simple, but when you dedicate yourself to each of these steps, you'll begin to see shifts happen. So much in life is really the simple things, truly. Like so much of the transformation we need to do in our life is really the simple things. How do you feel better, like going out for a walk? How do you feel better in terms of food? Make sure you don't overeat. Make sure you eat whole foods. Like they're very simple things, but they don't make them easy to do necessarily. And so as I go into these 3 steps, step 1 is building awareness. Step 2 is reframing your thoughts. And step 3 is embodying this whole process. And so step 1 is awareness, step 2 is reframe, and step 3 is embody. Now, starting with step 1, when we talk about awareness, anything in life, anything that you want to change in your life must start with awareness. Rosibel, I know you had a podcast episode once where you talked about burnout, right? You talked about the experience with burnout, and it really has to start with the awareness. Like, where am I experiencing burnout, right? What is happening when burnout comes up? What are the feelings in my body when burnout is here? What are the things that my husband says to me when he is giving me a hug and being like, are you okay? Like, those are flags that can begin to show you where you are. And so I always start with step 1, awareness. You want to start to build awareness around if you're starting to feel like, oh, I don't belong here. Maybe I don't have what it takes. Instead of really going with those same thoughts day in and day out, take a moment to build awareness on where is that coming up? Is it coming up in a particular meeting with particular people? Is it coming up when I'm asked to share my thoughts and my ideas? Is it coming up when I have to go and talk to, Jacob, the CFO? When is it coming up? And notice and build awareness, not only on when in the context in which it is coming up, but also the content, meaning what are the thoughts that your brain is serving you in those situations. You want to get real familiar. Oh, my brain will constantly say, you're not good enough. It will constantly say, you're going to fail. It'll constantly say, you want to begin to build awareness around what are the most common thoughts that your brain likes to give you when you're in those situations. So step 1 is awareness. And I have one tool that I like to share whenever it comes to step 1 on building awareness. It's my favorite awareness tool, and it's called interpretation versus fact. When we talk about facts, I'm talking about what happened. When we're talking about interpretation, what I'm saying is what's the story you made up about why that happened. So a fact can be someone gave me praise and then my direct manager started to praise another employee. That could be the fact of what happened. Person A gave me praise. My manager gave another person praise. That's a fact. Interpretation is she doesn't like me. She's always trying to take my light away. She's always trying to minimize my work. And I'll hear these things because my client really believes it. And it could be true. But the reality is we don't know if it's true. That's the difference. When you want to start building awareness, you have to start recognizing where are your stories, where do those exist, and what are the facts? Because our brains create shortcuts for everything. It's how we're able to get through life because there's so much information for us to process. So our brain constantly creates shortcuts. That's why we have bias and that's why we have stereotypes, because our brain is an interpretation machine. It takes one thing and it processes it all that way. And so you want to begin to discern between what are the interpretations. Oh, I'm not qualified. Well, what do you mean by that? What's the fact? How many years of experience do you have? What is the job description requiring? Have you done anything that could be a correlation or a parallel to that bullet point that Jatna was saying, maybe I disqualify myself for? That's what I begin to mean. And what it does is it allows you to get a little bit less out of your emotional side and into your logical analytical side, which is very helpful when we're talking about imposter syndrome. Because when you start questioning your sense of belonging, your sense of ability to do things, that tends to do something to the nervous system that's more harmful than it is supportive in your growth. So you want to be able to calm it down. And that's one tool that I give: interpretation versus fact. What actually happened? And it wouldn't be an argument amongst 5 people. And then what is the story about what you made that mean? You want to separate those. And I like to do it just on a piece of paper. I'll put interpretation on one side, I'll put fact on the other side, and I'll put a line down the middle. And I'll just write down what are the interpretations and what are the facts. And that's how you can start to build awareness around what's happening. So that's my step 1. Just saying, I'll take a pause there because I know sometimes I go a little much.
No, I love it. I'm reflecting here that I do have a lot of interpretations going on in my mind a lot. So, and even as you know, when I start out by saying to you, oh, depends on the personality of the person. Because I know I see myself in rooms at work. If it's with people that I know or are not as strong personality, that, they're kind of more easygoing, it's not their way or the highway. I speak my mind. I just feel like I come up with the greatest ideas. I am creative. I'm just more of myself. But in other environments, I'm just me recojo. Like I'm just like, oh, there's other people here that have better ideas than me, or they're higher up than me, um, or they just don't like me, or sometimes it can even be like I'm the only Latina or I'm the youngest. Like I'm saying, I could come up with so many stories because I can testify that I do have a lot of interpretations. So thank you so much for sharing. I'll definitely be using that tool.
Yeah. And I think that, so when we go back to internal and external, for example, like one of the things when we talk about external is there are certain leadership qualities that we know bring out a better side of people in terms of safety, psychological safety, being able to breed a ground where people feel like they can contribute their ideas, and people of all different backgrounds and of all different, whatever it may be, from all different ideas that they can contribute. So that's an external thing that's very real. Someone who cuts you off, someone who yells at you, someone who maybe has questioned your ability to speak English in the past, those kinds of things, very real, are going to impact you and create a sense of like, maybe I don't have what it takes. Maybe I can't contribute the way that I think. However, there's also the internal side, even in just the example you said, where you can notice that it is your thoughts about what one place is about, like your thoughts when you're in a place there, that there are people that will listen. It's literally your thoughts going, oh, I can share my ideas here, that then allow you to share your ideas there. And then there are thoughts when you're in a different place where you're like, oh, I'm the only Latina, which could be a fact, by the way. It could be a fact that you're the only Latina, but the way that it's making you feel is usually something that's having you shut down. So then we'll go to actually step 2, where it's like reframing. Like, how do you begin to reframe those same thoughts that you have into something that's going to support your growth, empower you, and actually have you take action? And so if you build awareness on the context, on where you're experiencing this and the thoughts that are coming up, you want to begin to reframe them into something that's going to empower you, something that's going to allow you to want to take action, even if you're afraid. And so that could be something like, if you go, I'm the only Latina in the room, if that feels heavy and if it feels scary, then one, you want to assess, could I reframe this into an empowering feeling? Could I say like, wow, I'm the only Latina. This is my time to be able to shine and share what I can bring in my perspective. You could reframe it into that. Or if that's too challenging, if I am the only Latina constantly feels heavy and scary, then you want to switch it into something else where maybe it's like, I have a lot in common with the people that are here. And you focus on the things that you have in common with the people that are there. So reframing is all about taking the thoughts that are creating heaviness, that are maybe shutting you down, that are having you stay quiet, and reframing them into something else that empowers you, that feels. It's so important that when you're reframing thoughts in particular, that you can feel something in connection to that thought, because our feelings are very powerful in being able to create a change in us, and how our body is able to connect with the thought, because our body can't actually tell the difference when we are, for example, burning out and stressed. Our body doesn't actually understand that physically we are safe and not in danger. Our body actually thinks that we are in danger. That is why it is going overboard and it's burning out. It's like overfrying our nervous system. So I say that to make the point that your feelings, when you create a new thought and you reframe it, you want to be able to feel into it, because your body's not going to tell the difference between, oh, okay, this is fake. Like we're actually not feeling really great. Like, no, it's just going to be like, oh, this feels good. This feels empowering. We can do it. And so you want to begin to reframe your thoughts into something different. And one of the things that I really like to do, in particular for imposter syndrome in the workplace, is I like to give people the exercise of, I want you to tell me all the times you have had to overcome a situation that would be similar to this. So if, for an example, your struggle is to speak up in meetings and share your ideas when you're the only Latina, let's say you reframe your thought to, I have a lot in common with these people here. And then what you can do is you can give yourself evidence for how you are capable of doing the thing you feel afraid to do. I'll say that again. You want to give yourself evidence for how you are capable of doing the thing that you want to do, but that you feel scared of. And so that can be like, well, I remember this one time when I was really scared to speak up in class, but I spoke up and said something anyway. I remember one time when my dad needed me to translate something and I was really scared to translate it for him, but I did it anyway. You begin to give yourself evidence for how you've done the thing that is similar to what you want to do now. Because the thing is most of the time we've done something that has required us to be courageous, that has required us to speak up, that's required us to be confident. At some point, we've had to do something that has required that kind of confidence in us. And we just want to remind ourselves that we can do that again too, especially as like first-gen Latinas or as people who are immigrants. Like when we start to talk about you're being afraid of going into the unknown and figuring it out, that is most first-gen Latinas' life, is going into the unknown and figuring it out. So you want to start to bring yourself back to how have you done this in the past, because you have, and how can you bring that same kind of energy, that same kind of vibe into this situation, because you can. But because it's a different type of situation, your brain is saying it can't. So you want to begin to reframe and give yourself evidence to support that.
That's awesome, because I'm just here reflecting as you speak. I remember when I started working at the corporation, I was giving a mentor by my upline. And at that time, we still had the family restaurant that I actually helped kind of start. And then I started the corporate job. And my mentor and I went to that restaurant. And she just saw the way I interacted with people. I was a complete different person. And she said, "Why aren't you like this at the office?" And I said, "Well, I mean, this is an environment I'm used to. This is an environment where I know that what I'm doing. This is an environment where I feel valued, or I know that I'm bringing value." So, and just at corporate, like I said, I still struggle with that. And just listening to you, I'm like, oh, maybe I should start thinking of ways, like you said, give myself the evidence of being capable of knowing what I can do. Like just reflect on one time I was able to do that and say I could do that in this XYZ situation as well. So
yes. Oh, that's really, really good. And so you start to anchor into the identity of who you are, which is someone who is capable, someone who can be confident, someone who can lead. You start to anchor yourself into that identity, and then you create an action plan. And so one of the things the concepts that I share, it's a personal development concept called be, do, have. And in our world, we live in the opposite. We live in a world of have, do, be, meaning we live in a world where people think if I have more money, then I would go to the gym because I'd have a gym membership. So I'd go to the gym and then I would be healthy. That's an example of have, do, be. You think you need to have something first in order for you to be able to do it, in order for you to be able to be the thing that you want to be. But in personal development, this concept is about how can you actually flip it? How can you actually be the person that needs to be in order for that action to get done? So be confident, be a great communicator, be a leader, whatever those being identities are. How can you be that person now? And then from there, you anchor into the identity and you create what's your action plan? What do you do from there? So even in your example, Rosibel, if you look at how have I been a leader in the restaurant, in the family restaurant, and you anchor into those identities, well, I had to be very direct, I had to be confident, I had to be X, Y, and Z. Then you can go and think about that in your current office job. And you can go, if I'm anchored into these identities, what would someone who is confident do in this role here at this corporate office? What would someone who is a great leader do in this role here at this company? And then you start to give yourself your action list based on those identities that you're anchoring into. And then you're bound to eventually have the things that you desire to have. And so I like to share that one with Reframe, because we oftentimes need to be able to shift what we think we need to have first in order to make it happen. And so one example of this, of a be, do, have that I went through with a client, is I'll sometimes help my clients request their coaching to be reimbursed from their employer if they desire to have that happen. And I had one client who had just started a new role, and she was just like, well, and that brings up a lot of drama, by the way. That brings up a lot of insecurities for Latinas to go and ask to be supported and to be reimbursed and be invested in. But that's another topic. And she said, I remember what she said. She was like, if I was here for more time, so listen, if I had more time, if I had been in this company for more time, that's the thing you need to have. If I had more time here, then I would go and ask them, because I would feel better about the fact that I've been here for more time. So that's the doing. She thinks that if she had more time, she would go and do this thing, which is ask for her coaching to be reimbursed. And then she would have her coaching reimbursed. She would have a coach that has been paid for by the company. That was a very traditional, like, have, do, be. So what I had to work on her is who would you need to be right now to be able to ask for this? What would you need to believe about yourself? Well, she was like, well, I would have to believe that I am worthy of asking for this, even though I just started. I would have to believe that I am worthy of being invested in, even though I just got hired. I would have to believe that my role, like if I'm able to succeed in my role more, then that's beneficial to the organization. So she had to really think about the things she must be about and identify as. And then she had to go and make the ask from that place. And then she got the approval and had her coaching reimbursed for her. But it's really about flipping it. It's about, instead of, whenever you think I need to have this thing first, just begin to question it. It doesn't mean it's not true. I'm just saying, question it and be like, who would the person that has that thing be right now? And then create your action plan from there. And so that's really all reframing. Like, choose a thought to kind of close that step out. Build awareness on the thoughts that are holding you back. You want to reframe it into something that feels like, really generates a feeling in you that you desire to create the things that you want to create. And then you really want to start thinking about, who do I need to be? The person that goes in there and shares her ideas, even though she's the only Latina, who does that person need to be? And then create your action plan. Well, if that is me, if I'm a confident person going into this place, then maybe what I would do is I would brainstorm what ideas I would want to share. I would share them with some of my friends to be able to get comfortable sharing them. I would ask my work buddy to back me up whenever I share it, so that there can be some approval there and to have me feel a little bit safer. You come up with a plan once you've identified and grounded yourself into, like, who do I need to be to create this to happen?
Yeah, to me, everything you're saying, like, as I'm thinking and reflecting, right? It feels like and I've felt this way before, right? Like, when asking for things, right? That I may not, I don't know, that I feel like maybe I will get it because I need to demonstrate that I, kind of like, I'm worthy of this, and that I need to demonstrate that I am a good employee, and I need to demonstrate that I'm a good leader or whatever. So it's hard though, right? Because like you want to ask for certain things because you know your worth and you know that you deserve it. But then there's those thoughts, right? That tells you like, well, maybe before I go do this, I should probably demonstrate that I'm really good at this or I'm capable of this. And so then they'll give me whatever it is I'm asking for. And so it happens a lot, but it's really hard to like shut it off. Or even like you said, like reframing or whatever, when you're going through it, right? Because you're just like, I still don't know how to do that. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And that really goes into the place of step 3, which is the embodiment. And that's just the consistent practice of building awareness, reframing your thoughts, and going for it. Building awareness, reframing your thoughts, and going for it. Because it's not that I don't believe in it. I think it's possible. What I don't lead with like, how can we ensure that you go in there feeling confident and unafraid? Because the truth is you're probably going to have to go in there and you're probably going to be afraid. And that's just going to be, that's where courage comes in. You got to feel that fear and you got to be like, but this is what I believe about myself. All you need to do is be able to get to the point. I'm not saying it's easy. All you need to do is get to the point where the voice of fear is not overcome by the voice of courage. That's all. It doesn't mean that fear is not there, but you just need to not allow fear to be in the driver's seat. Fear's got to be in the back seat. They're still there, but you allow courage, you allow confidence, you allow creativity, whatever those identity factors are that we talked about in the step 2, you allow those to be in the driver's seat and go, hey, we got this. We know you're scared. That's okay. We're going to do it, because that is how you begin to build further and further evidence for yourself. Confidence, like Rosabel said, like, I feel really confident here. I know it here. I know how things run here. This is also a family business. So there's a lot of just like connection there. But confidence oftentimes comes from consistent action, because then we start to become familiar with it. I didn't feel confident the first time I delivered my first workshop on overcoming imposter syndrome. No, I was afraid. But I had something and I had to believe in it enough to do it anyway. And then now it comes out a lot more fluid, but because I had to do it consistently. And so embodiment is all about doing step 1 and step 2. So building the awareness, like, yes, it is hard, Jatna. And that's why it's like doing it over and over. Okay, what happened here? What did I think? What went wrong? And then, okay, how do I want to reframe? And this is tedious. I'm not going to say it's fun work, but it's very rewarding work to look back and be like, dang, I used to be so afraid to do that. And now I feel great about it. Now I feel confident about it because it's familiar, because it's this. And then you go off and you want to grow into the next level. And then you do that process all over again. And that's for only really the people that want to grow. That's not for everyone. But if you want to continue to do that growth and continue to expand out of the comfort zone, which is really just everything that's familiar to you, you want to grow outside of that, then you do that process all over again. So it is tedious, and it takes just consistency of like, okay, what is this? What is working? What isn't working? And doing the things that cause you fear, doing those things consistently. So if it's speaking up, that's just such a big one. That's why I bring it up so much. It's such a big one with the clients that I work with, is speaking up. I think culturally, there's a lot of things. We know calladita te ves más bonita, something we've been grown up. So there's a lot of cultural narratives, particularly in Latin America, that have impacted Latinas in the workplace because they really struggle to speak up. So that's why I bring it up. But if, let's say, it's speaking up, then what it's important too is not that you're like, okay, I'm going to do it one meeting, and then you don't try again for like 3 months. Así vas a llegar en 3 años. I don't even know how long it's going to take you to be able to overcome it. You have to be able to give yourself consistency. Okay, I didn't speak up at that weekly all staff meeting. Okay, that didn't go well, but next week we have another opportunity. And then you go again. And so it's important for that consistency. It is a challenge because it's not comfortable, but that is how you create a new comfort zone that is larger and outside of where you currently are. And that's how you grow.
And, I love that you're saying this, because recently, literally like recently, we had, in my organization, we had like a leadership meeting. And, the main leader that leads like the meeting with other leaders, he asked everyone for how's it going? How are your teams doing? Like, what's happening? And so he went by like in the room, like asking per name, like he would call out like, oh, so-and-so, whatever. And then I'm sure he didn't mean to do that, because then he came back to me the next day and was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that you were, because I was virtual. So most of the people were in person and I was virtual. So I know that was just like, he didn't mean to do that. However, I could have, whenever it got to the point where like he ended with everybody, like he called on everybody and they shared, I was the only leader that he didn't call out. But I was there and I could have said like, hey, you forgot me. But because I am like one of the newer leaders, right, in the department. And again, like, I just feel like, I don't know, maybe like what I have to say is not important, right? Like he doesn't want to know about what my team is doing or whatever. I didn't say anything, right? Like I could have said like, hey, I'm here. I want to share, but I didn't, right? So the next day he was like, hey, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. And I know he didn't mean to, but I could have, right? Like I could have just said, I'm here, I'm going to share. So it's one of those things, right? Where you're just like, I don't know, like, I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like it just felt
Yeah.
I felt really weird at that point, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm like, okay, maybe, like you said, like next time I'm going to have to, like, if that happens again, I'm going to have to, speak up and make sure that I'm also, he knows that I'm here or whatever. So, but it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. Like I could have said
Yeah.
something, but I didn't, right? Because I felt like
Right.
he doesn't want to know, like nobody wants to know, like it's fine. Like I'm not going to say anything. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. And so this is such a great example because if we look at interpretation versus fact, what was the interpretation and what was the fact, Jenna?
I interpreted that he just didn't want to know, right? Like he wasn't interested in knowing what my team was doing. But the fact was that he just didn't mean to. Like he didn't see me on the screen, like he didn't see my name or anything because he was like in person. They were all in person, and he just didn't realize that I was there. So he forgot to call on me. That was the fact.
Yes. And even then, like if you peel back to the moment that it was happening, Jatnas, just so for all the listeners can begin to really see how this happens. The fact in that moment was he went around and he asked all the people leaders in the room. He did not call on me, period. That was a fact. Because at that point, you don't know. You don't know if he didn't mean to call on you. You don't know if he did that on purpose. You don't know if he doesn't want to hear from you. You have no idea if his intention was ill or if his intention was just like, I had no clue. That was never my intention, right? And so, but once you just see that, once you just see, oh, he didn't call on that. I mean, he did call on them. He didn't call on me. Then you know that's the fact, the interpretation. I think he doesn't want to hear from me. Da, 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 and you go through those things, and then you can decide from there. Like it's just like, oh, okay. Hey, by the way, I wasn't called on. I'd love to share. Is that okay? Can I share? And
but then my internal, right? Like then all those things started to like creep in, and I was just like, no, you know what? I'm not gonna speak up. I'm not gonna say anything. We'll whatever. we'll move on, right? So
yeah. And then you come up with it, like the reframing. You come up with like, what's your thought? And then for the next time, like you said, for the next time, whenever that comes up, whenever you think that you've been purposely left out or people don't want to hear from you, like you can take those general things and you can have a reframe. You can have like a thought and be like, whatever that thought is, and be like, oh, okay, no, I'm going to go with this one. And then you ask and you speak up. But yeah, it's such a great example of like how our interpretations, because our interpretations, like our thoughts will generate feelings. So we either have thoughts that generate feelings that support our growth, or that we have thoughts that generate feelings that hinder our growth. And so in this case, it was an example of thoughts that created feelings that hindered, like it had you not want to speak up because it was like fear. It was like, I don't want to like step on their toes. I don't want to be disrespectful. I don't want to question authority. Like, things like that creates a lot of fear. And so it's just noticing what are those thoughts? And then how can I have alternative thoughts? So whenever this one creeps in, which is like a fan favorite, you love to just always show up, you have an alternative to be like, oh yeah, but this is what we're going to start going with now.
Yes. So I'm listening.
Yeah, I'm glad. And those are my 3 steps. So I'm glad, we kind of went through those, but starting off with building awareness, use interpretation versus fact as a tool. You want to reframe your thoughts and you want to think about be, do, have, like who do you need to be in order to do the thing you want to do, in order to have the thing you want to have. And then embodiment, which is the consistent daily practice. And I didn't go through a tool, but one of my favorites is just journaling. If you journal on a regular basis, you will begin to be able to track and see, are you progressing? Are you not? Are the same thoughts still showing up? How journaling on your achievements, your wins. I spoke up today, and the simple things are so great. If you start with, for example, oh, I didn't get called on, and I, said, hey, I want to be able to share. Big wins, put that in there. And then that way you're able to begin to track how you are progressing and what identities have been supporting you and what thoughts are hindering you and how you're reframing them. So that's the tool that I like to do for embodiment is journal, but it's about consistency. It's the practice and consistency. And you'll slowly begin to see yourself overcome the imposter syndrome situation you have right now to a point where you will feel so great in it. And then you'll be in a place where you're ready to then expand into another level and then start that process over.
And I think this is a good segue to the next question because it's mostly for me, but also I'm asking for like anyone, right? Like any other Latina that it's a leader in an organization, not necessarily corporate, right? But just like overall a leader. What advice would you give us, and to us Latinas in leadership at times when we're struggling with imposter syndrome? Like I know you share a couple of things with me, but like what, bigger picture, like what would you what would you recommend we do when we're feeling that way at that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I mean, I definitely think going back to the 3 steps. So I'm going to offer something outside of those 3 steps, not because I think this is more important, but because I've already given a layout for that, but 100% go through those 3 steps, really see what is going on so that you can begin to overcome those. And I really want to emphasize the importance of creating an action plan, because again, it's not about not having fear. It's not about like, I need to feel confident before I go and do this. It's about how can confidence be in the driver's seat and fear be in the back seat, and you do it anyway. So coming up with action plans are really helpful so that you have a very clear step-by-step. This is what I'm going to do to help me get grounded before the meeting, if I'm going to speak up, and go through those steps one by one. So I'm a big fan of creating actual plans on how you're going to do the thing that is scary for you to do. And then the last thing I want to say for this is Latina leaders are severely under-mentored and severely under-resourced. And under-resourced is also just resources of knowledge, information, knowing how things run, knowing how to do things, especially when either you're an immigrant or you're a first gen and you don't have parents who are in the corporate space to kind of give you the lay of the land. And so one of the biggest tips that I always share is find a professional development space for you. That means find a space that is specifically created to support you in your professional growth. I know that we have our tias and our moms and our cousins and our friends and our sisters and whatever that may be. I'm not talking about that. They can support you. I believe it 100%. But I'm talking about find a professional space where the goal is to develop you professionally and be in those spaces where you can feel safe and talk about these kinds of things, because you'll find that there's going to be other people that experience it, which is going to support you in feeling less lonely. And you'll also see other people overcome it, which will inspire you to believe that you can too. And that is very, very, very helpful in your profession. A lot of the struggles we face, it's oftentimes rooted in feeling alone and like, what is wrong with me? I'm never going to get over this. I'm never going to be able to achieve these things. And so being able to find spaces where you can see people, similar to you, and that can mean an array of things. It doesn't have to be primarily like they're Latinas, although that could be a choice too, but that are similar to you and that you feel can inspire you. Those spaces are really, really important. And I find that oftentimes Latinas don't have those at all. They have they might listen to their partner or a sister, a lot of like family members and things like that, which are great, but you need to have your own space outside of your family, outside of the people that have a lot of like biases about who you are, and just outside of that, and have people that are going to develop you professionally.
Awesome. So with that comes to mind though, it's like you would be the perfect professional to start building that space.
Yes. And I actually do. I have a space that I specifically created for this. And it's because I saw it. Like I worked one-on-one with many people and I saw it. I was like, oh my gosh, they really think that they are like, no one else experiences this, or that something is wrong with that. And so I created Latinas in Leadership, which is a group coaching program specifically for this, because I knew they need to see that they are not alone. They need to see that, oh my gosh, that Latina is doing it too. They need to see a Latina in a director role. Like, what? They need to see a Latina who's a principal at a school. What? They need to be able to see these things. And that's why, this is a different topic, but representation. Like once we're able to see other people that remind us of us do things, it changes something in our psychology. And that's why representation is so important. So yeah, Rosabel, sorry to cut you off, but yeah, I feel very strongly about that. It's so important.
No, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to know. So with your coaching Latinas in Leadership, is there a website, Instagram page? Where can our Latinas start finding you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So on my company is called Empower Her Change. So it's EMPOWHER change, Empower Her Change. And that is my handle on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I'm LinkedIn/AI Hernandez, A as in apple, I as in igloo, Hernandez. And I'm most active on LinkedIn. So I will say that I am most active on LinkedIn. If you're afraid to get on LinkedIn, don't worry. Like, just hop on there. It's a great place to be able to build your brand, build professionally. You're more than welcome to follow me on there. It's where I post the majority of my content. And then my website is empowerherchange.com. And you can learn all about me there as well.
Well, thank you, Alejandra, so much. I know that I learned a ton. So I know all of our listeners, hopefully they come back and they have a notepad and pen, or weren't taking notes on their phone, because definitely there's so much knowledge here that we could walk away with and start taking actions. So in our closings, I always say, I love to have a call to action, because if you invested your time listening to Dos Latinos episode, we want you to walk away with something to start taking action right away. So I'm going to just sum up kind of what I believe were the main takeaways from all the knowledge and great vibes we got from Alejandra today is, so ladies, number one, build awareness. Remember, Alejandra told us, write down a piece of paper, facts, interpretation, make a line in between, and start putting those into those different buckets. Number two is, reframe your thoughts. The thing that I love what she said was that give yourself evidence of what that one time that you were capable of doing it. And just remember that that you can do it. And of course, with the be, do, and have, I love that building your action plan is, okay, that you can do it. Now that start being that person that you say you want to be, but what is your action plan behind it? So, and number three, the embodying it, as Alejandra was saying, is, stay consistent. And I think this is going to be the hardest thing for me.
It is.
I'm just going to put that out there. So don't beat yourself up. If you spoke up at one meeting and you didn't at the next one, don't beat yourself up, just start again. Or if you're in a different environment, like let's say that you're your own boss, you're an entrepreneur and you give out presentations to your clients, kind of like Ale does. She mentioned her first presentation, she wasn't as confident, but she kept going. She believed in it. She stayed consistent. So, and also I love how at the end Ale spoke about just journaling, just keep on writing down those thoughts, and that really helps. I remember I did a short-term therapy session, and it was for confidence, because I said, I'm going to be talking to all these women in this space. I need to start believing more in myself. And one of the things, that exercise that I had was that it was reframing, is write down one of the things and journaling. And that really helped me. I'm like, okay, I am a badass. I am accomplishing things. So that way we also celebrate on small wins every single day, which I would say would really lead us to always that equation of being confident and unafraid is courage. And I love the way that Alice said, fear must always be in the back seat, not in the front seat. So con eso las dejo, and remember to go to Empower Her Change. I love how it's empowerherchange.com. Also on Instagram, and as Alice said, most active on LinkedIn. So AI Hernandez. Hopefully, many of you start reaching out to Latinas in Leadership Coaching Program. I'm saying this from my heart, not because Alice said it, but seriously, like Ale found Dos Latinas because she listened to the burnout episode, and I was like, oh my gosh, how did she find that? So, and after just going through her website and everything, so I was just like, yeah, Jana, we really got to reach out to Alejandra, and I'm so glad that we did. And this is kind of like also perfect timing for us that are out in corporate world. We just did our end year reviews and right now we're thinking about our next goals. And I'm just thinking like, wow, perfect timing, because now we could really start building the action plan, as Alice said. So muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Alejandra, for your time. Appreciate it so much, and so nice meeting you. And I just love the whole connection and chat that we had today.
Thank you. I'm really glad that I got to talk with you. And yes, I love what your podcast is doing. I am just consistently looking for who are the voices that are empowering Latinas. And so when I find Latinas that are doing this, I just feel like absolutely honored, inspiring. I love that you have this platform. I think it's so important that we're able to hear each other's stories. And so I'm grateful that you resonated with my story as well and that we got to collaborate.
Thank you so much. Bueno, ya saben, mujeres, empowerher.com or on LinkedIn or Instagram. Y hasta la próxima. Chao.
Ciao.